In the dimly lit command center of the Galactic Alliance, a sense of anticipation filled the air. High-ranking officials from various species gathered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to quiet skepticism. This was the annual military survival test, a tradition meant to push elite soldiers to their limits on one of the most inhospitable planets in the galaxy. The briefing was straightforward. Soldiers would be dropped into a hostile environment, stripped of advanced technology, and left to survive on their wits and instincts. Success meant survival, and failure meant certain death. The planet chosen for this test was infamous, scarred by violent storms, teeming with vicious predators, and prone to sudden, deadly shifts in climate. Few had ever made it through the test without severe injury or loss. The stakes were high, and each species had sent their best. The officials discussed the participants. This year's lineup was as varied as ever. There were the cautious Zilrans, known for their methodical approach to survival, and the Venari, a predatory species that thrived on their hunting prowess. But what caught everyone's attention was the mention of the Deathworlders, humans. This was the first time Deathworlders had been invited to the survival test. Their inclusion was a topic of debate. Humans, or Deathworlders as they were often called, hailed from a planet considered one of the most dangerous in the galaxy. It was said that their world was rife with dangers that would break lesser species. Still, many in the room viewed them with suspicion. Could these beings, so prone to recklessness, really survive an environment more hostile than their home? As the briefing continued, there were murmurs of disbelief. Some officials considered it a mistake to allow the humans to join. "They don't understand what they're walking into," one of them muttered, eyes flicking to the monitor showing the harsh terrain of the test planet. But others were intrigued, wondering if the Deathworlders' reputation for resilience was more than just myth. The planet itself was a death trap. Dark clouds loomed overhead, crackling with electric storms that could fry any unshielded being. The landscape was unforgiving, jagged mountains, shifting sands, and forests filled with creatures that could kill in seconds. Water was scarce, and what little existed was often toxic. Those who had faced the test before knew that every step forward could be a misstep into disaster. Venomous insects, carnivorous plants, and violent weather patterns would test every ounce of a soldier's will to survive. For the other species, this planet represented their worst nightmares made real. It wasn't just about physical endurance but mental fortitude. Many had faced these elements in simulations, but the real thing was far more unpredictable. Veterans spoke in hushed tones about comrades who had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the planet itself. This world demanded respect, and it rarely gave second chances. In stark contrast to the other participants, the humans didn't seem fazed by the descriptions of the planet's many dangers. While the Zilrans methodically planned their every move, calculating risks down to the last detail, the humans seemed almost casual in their preparation. Some of them joked about the similarities between this test and a particularly harsh day back on Earth. Their apparent lack of fear was unsettling to the others, who had long been conditioned to treat every danger as potentially fatal. How could they be so confident? The Venari, always quick to test the strength of others, sneered at the humans' bravado. "They'll be the first to fall," one of their commanders scoffed, flashing a predatory grin. The Venari were hunters by nature, their instincts honed to a razor's edge. To them, survival meant staying on the offensive, using the environment to trap or kill their enemies. They believed the humans would be too soft, too used to their advanced technology to survive in the raw, unyielding wilderness. But the humans had a different view of danger altogether. Born from a world where death was a constant companion, they had learned not to panic in the face of threats but to assess, adapt, and overcome. The planet they were about to step onto might have seemed like a nightmare to others, but to the humans, it was simply another challenge. Their approach wasn't arrogance, it was experience. Years of surviving a world that actively sought to destroy them had made the humans something more than just survivors. They were thrivers. Despite their calm demeanor, the other species continued to view the humans with skepticism. Officials watched the human group closely, analyzing their every move, waiting for a sign of hesitation or doubt. But none came. The humans prepared with the same casual determination they had shown from the start, packing gear with precision, exchanging words of encouragement, and making light of what was clearly meant to be a harrowing experience. To the seasoned military personnel observing the event, this was the first sign that something unusual was about to unfold. They had seen seasoned soldiers from dozens of species crack under the pressure of this planet's relentless dangers. The fact that the Deathworlders seemed unaffected, even uninterested in the growing tension, left many feeling uneasy. Were the humans simply too reckless to understand the stakes, or did they know something the others didn't? The test was about to begin, and each species stood at the edge of their drop zones, waiting for the signal. The air crackled with anticipation as the countdown began. For most, it felt like stepping into the unknown, a place where even the slightest mistake could be fatal. But for the humans, it felt familiar. They had faced death before, on their own world, and they were ready to face it again. As the signal to begin echoed across the vast expanse, the participants descended into the deadly landscape below. For the non-human species, every step would be calculated, every move carefully planned to avoid the many perils they would face. For the Deathworlders, however, it was simply another day in a long history of surviving the impossible. Their calmness, once viewed as recklessness, was about to be tested in ways the galaxy had never seen. The moment the signal was given, the participants were dropped onto the planet. The landing wasn't gentle, as the unforgiving terrain greeted each species with a harsh reminder of the dangers awaiting them. The skies above roared with thunder, and a hot wind blasted across the landscape. Immediately, the teams began to form. Each species, well practiced in military drills, fell into their predetermined roles. Some set up defensive perimeters, while others scanned their surroundings for threats. Everyone moved with caution, except for the humans. The Deathworlders, as soon as their boots hit the ground, split off into their group. There was no urgency, no frantic attempts to assess every possible threat. Instead, they moved with a kind of fluid efficiency, more concerned with gathering their bearings than with reacting to the planet itself. The terrain didn't faze them. Harsh winds and jagged rocks that slowed others to a crawl were barely an inconvenience to the humans. They exchanged words, brief and focused, but there was no fear in their voices. The other species, meanwhile, faced immediate challenges. The planet wasted no time in showing its hostility. Predatory creatures, drawn by the noise of the landing, began circling. One species, the Eryxians, quickly fell back to regroup, forming defensive lines. Their reptilian bodies trembled slightly, not out of weakness but out of the intense focus required to maintain composure in such an environment. The threat was real, and their caution was justified. Each step forward felt like it could trigger disaster. But the humans had already disappeared into the wild, moving at a steady pace, showing no signs of panic. While other groups were still organizing, the Deathworlders had already begun to adapt, as though they belonged there. Their confidence was unnerving to anyone watching. Not long after the drop, the first major threat arrived. A massive predator, a hulking beast with razor-sharp claws and a hide as tough as steel, charged through the underbrush. The ground trembled as it approached, and the skies above darkened with an impending storm. For most species, this was a nightmare scenario. The beast let out a terrifying roar, sending several teams into immediate defensive positions. The Zilrans, known for their tactical discipline, activated energy shields, creating a protective barrier to shield themselves. Their strategy was sound: retreat and survive. The Deathworlders, however, responded differently. As the creature roared, the humans didn't flee or even seek cover. Instead, they stopped, analyzing it. There was no fear, only a methodical approach to the problem. While other species saw a threat to avoid, the humans saw an opportunity. One of them even smirked before issuing quick orders to the rest of the team. Within moments, they had a plan. A trap was set using nothing but the environment around them, a large rock loosened from its perch, set to roll down and distract the creature. As soon as it was set in motion, they moved, fluid and coordinated. The beast charged at them, but instead of retreating, they lured it into their trap. The massive rock slammed into the beast's side, throwing it off balance. With quick, precise movements, the humans dispatched it before it had the chance to recover. The observers at the command center were stunned. The test had barely begun, and already the Deathworlders were showing a level of composure that defied logic. The screen showing the human team was filled with the aftermath of their kill. Where other species had needed to hunker down and defend, the humans had gone on the offensive, using the planet's own terrain against its creatures. One official shook their head in disbelief. "They act like this is nothing," they muttered, astonished. Discussions broke out among the observers. Some dismissed the humans' actions as sheer recklessness, convinced that they didn't truly understand the danger they were in. "They're too bold," one alien general commented. "They'll get themselves killed." But others were beginning to see something different. The humans weren't being reckless. They were simply unfazed by the level of danger that had terrified others. It was as if their entire perspective on survival was different from anything the Galactic Alliance had ever seen. "They don't treat this as danger," another official said quietly. "To them, this is just normal." As the test continued, the cracks in the other species' resolve began to show. The Venari, a species known for their precise combat instincts, struggled. They had relied too heavily on their advanced weapons and technology, which were limited in this test. Without their usual tools, their movements became hesitant. One misstep led to another, and soon they found themselves bogged down by the environment, forced to retreat deeper into defensive positions. Meanwhile, the Eryxians, who had formed their tight defensive lines earlier, were visibly shaken. They had always relied on calculated caution, but the planet's relentless assaults were beginning to wear them down. Their movements became jittery, their confidence cracking under the constant strain. By contrast, the Deathworlders seemed almost at ease. They moved through the deadly landscape with a rhythm that suggested they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. While the other species struggled to maintain composure, the humans laughed, exchanged jokes, and pushed forward with an air of casual defiance. The weather, the predators, even the terrain, none of it seemed to register as a significant threat in their minds. They moved as though they had trained for this their entire lives. As more dangers arose, the gap between the Deathworlders and the other species became more apparent. Another team, known for its tactical precision, found itself overwhelmed by a sudden storm that unleashed acid rain. Their carefully planned approach, designed to minimize risk, fell apart as the storm forced them to abandon their positions. Panic spread through the ranks as they scrambled for cover. The Deathworlders, on the other hand, had already moved on, having sensed the storm long before it arrived. They had positioned themselves in natural shelters, watching calmly as the other teams faltered. The tension between species grew. Some began to resent the humans, viewing their ease with suspicion. How could they remain so calm in the face of such overwhelming danger? But for the Deathworlders, this was nothing new. They were not reckless. They were simply used to surviving in a world that constantly tried to kill them. The Deathworlders had started to turn the planet's hostile environment into their own personal playground. While the other species were focused on surviving each moment, the humans had begun to manipulate the very landscape to their advantage. Using nothing but the natural resources available, they created makeshift shelters, using large leaves to craft water-resistant coverings, and even reinforcing their camps with branches and stones, forming structures that could withstand the frequent, violent storms. What seemed like a struggle for life to others was now a test of ingenuity for the Deathworlders. The humans didn't just react to the dangers, they anticipated them. They moved through the terrain with ease, mapping out the planet's rhythms in a way that puzzled the other species. When it came time to find food, they didn't rely on rations but foraged, using their understanding of nature to identify edible plants and set traps for the smaller, less dangerous creatures. Their traps were simple but effective, catching animals that other species hadn't even noticed. For the Deathworlders, this planet was not a test of survival. It was a challenge to thrive, a puzzle to solve. Watching this unfold, the other species couldn't hide their confusion. They had come prepared for a fight for their lives, armed with years of military training and survival strategies developed over centuries. Yet here were the humans, treating the whole situation like a casual camping trip. The Venari, known for their hunting prowess, found themselves at a loss. Their highly structured strategies fell apart under the weight of the planet's unpredictable dangers. Watching the humans set simple traps using nothing more than their surroundings left them baffled. How could such basic methods succeed where their advanced tactics had failed? Even the Zilrans, the most methodical of the participants, began to crack. They had meticulously planned every move, but their strategies, designed for efficiency, were proving ineffective in an environment that refused to follow any predictable pattern. They watched the humans with growing frustration. The Deathworlders didn't seem to be following any of the expected rules of survival, and yet they were not only staying alive but thriving. The Zilrans' technology, though impressive, couldn't keep up with the shifting landscape, and as they struggled to maintain control, they realized that their approach to survival had limits. As the hours turned into days, the stress of the constant danger wore down the non-human teams. The planet didn't allow them a moment's rest, and their elaborate plans began to collapse under the weight of exhaustion and fear. One by one, the other species started to falter. Some retreated into defensive positions, hoping to outlast the planet's relentless attacks. But no matter how much they prepared, the Deathworlders always seemed to be one step ahead. It wasn't just that the humans weren't afraid, it was as if they didn't even see the danger the same way. Then came a true test, a threat of overwhelming magnitude. Without warning, a massive predator emerged from the dense jungle, a creature so large and powerful that even the most hardened soldiers froze in place. Its eyes burned with predatory intent, and its sheer size made it clear that no weapon the participants had could stop it. Panic rippled through the teams. The Venari immediately fell back, abandoning their position in a desperate attempt to find safety. The Zilrans activated every defense mechanism they had, but even their advanced technology failed to deter the beast. Fears spread quickly as teams scattered, using every last resource to defend themselves or flee. But not the humans. While the others scrambled, the Deathworlders didn't retreat. They stood their ground, calmly assessing the situation. The beast roared, sending shockwaves across the landscape, but the humans didn't flinch. Instead, they moved with purpose. One group led the creature away, while the rest set up an ambush using the environment around them. There was no fear, no hesitation. When the creature finally charged, the humans sprung their trap, using the terrain to force the predator into a vulnerable position. The fight was brutal, but it ended as quickly as it had begun, with the humans victorious, standing over the fallen beast. The other species could only watch in disbelief. They had faced the same threat and failed, yet the humans had not only survived but conquered. The Venari, who prided themselves on their hunting skills, were stunned. The Zilrans, with their calculated approach, were left speechless. This wasn't just survival, it was mastery. The Deathworlders had taken control of the situation in a way that defied all expectations. Back at command, the observers were in shock. They had expected the humans to struggle, to buckle under the weight of the planet's dangers like every other species before them. Instead, they had watched as the Deathworlders turned the survival test into something entirely different. What was supposed to be a life-or-death scenario had become an exercise in adaptation. The humans had treated the planet not as an enemy, but as an ally, something to be used, controlled, and conquered. "They don't see danger," one of the observers muttered, still trying to process what they had witnessed. "Not like we do," another official nodded, eyes still glued to the screen. "Their world has made them different. Every other species views survival as a battle, but the humans, they treat it like it's just another day." It was true. The humans' homeworld had prepared them in ways that no one else could fully understand. They had evolved on a planet that threw dangers at them daily, forcing them to adapt or die. It wasn't that they didn't recognize danger, it was that they had learned not to fear it. To the Deathworlders, survival wasn't about running from threats or reacting with caution. It was about facing those threats head-on, analyzing them, and finding ways to turn the situation to their advantage. As the survival test continued, the gap between the humans and the other species grew wider. Where others saw danger, the Deathworlders saw opportunity. Their calmness, once viewed as arrogance or recklessness, now looked like something much more profound, a deep understanding of survival that went beyond mere instinct. They didn't just survive, they thrived. And in doing so, they changed the very nature of the test itself. The final phase of the test arrived, a grueling challenge that pushed every participant to their absolute limits. The terrain was the worst yet, a vast stretch of barren wasteland filled with razor-sharp rock formations, boiling geysers, and toxic fumes that could melt through even the most advanced equipment. It was a race to the designated safe zone, but the term, safe, seemed almost laughable in a place like this. The other species, already beaten down by days of nonstop danger, struggled to even stand. Their bodies ached, their minds dulled by exhaustion, and their carefully rehearsed strategies had long since fallen apart. Fear was etched into their expressions as they faced this final, almost impossible task. The Deathworlders, however, showed no signs of slowing down. While the others hesitated, they moved with purpose. Their eyes remained sharp, their movements efficient and deliberate. There was no weariness, no second-guessing. The challenges that had eroded the strength of the other species only seemed to have sharpened the humans' resolve. Their experience from a lifetime on a planet that constantly sought to kill them had conditioned them for this. They had the endurance, both physical and mental, to handle whatever the environment threw at them. As they began their journey across the hostile terrain, they adapted on the fly. Where others faltered, the humans pressed forward. When faced with boiling geysers, they calculated the timing of the eruptions and sprinted through unscathed. The razor-sharp rocks were no match for their problem-solving, as they navigated them with makeshift tools and strategies that left even the observers wondering how they thought so fast. While the other species battled with the basic instinct of survival, the Deathworlders seemed to have transcended it, making survival look effortless. By the time they reached the safe zone, the contrast was undeniable. The Deathworlders arrived first, intact and unfazed by the brutal conditions they had just traversed. They moved as a unit, their teamwork seamless, and their focus unbroken. The sense of accomplishment wasn't just in their arrival but in how they had dominated the environment at every stage. For them, the test was never a battle against the planet, it was simply about understanding it and bending it to their will. Behind them, the non-human species trickled in. Some had lost members along the way, others arrived injured or barely conscious. For many, simply crossing the finish line was a victory, though it didn't feel like one. The exhaustion was palpable, and so was the disbelief. As they gathered in the safe zone, their eyes kept drifting toward the humans. How had they made it look so easy? The envy was apparent, but so was the growing realization that something fundamental had shifted. The test was supposed to reveal who could survive in the harshest of conditions, but for the other species, it had done something more. It had exposed the limits of their understanding of survival. Their careful strategies, their reliance on technology, and their fear of the unknown had been their undoing. The Deathworlders had shown them that survival wasn't just about endurance, it was about adaptation, ingenuity, and an ability to look at danger without flinching. It forced them to question their own methods, to wonder if they had been doing it wrong all along. Some were resentful, unable to reconcile their failure with the human success. They had prepared for this test for months, even years, only to watch the Deathworlders walk through it as though it were a mere exercise. Others, however, began to see the humans not with contempt but with a newfound respect. The humans had redefined what it meant to thrive in a hostile environment, and it was a lesson the others wouldn't soon forget. Back at the command center, the observers were deep in discussion. Every screen, every piece of data collected during the test painted the same picture. The Deathworlders had performed at a level no one had expected. At first, the humans had been seen as wild cards, potentially reckless, too confident in their abilities. But now, there was no denying that their confidence came from a place of deep experience and understanding. They had not only survived the test, they had outsmarted it at every turn. "What they've done here," one commander remarked. "It's not just about brute strength or stamina. They don't just react to danger, they anticipate it, mold it to their advantage." Another official, who had been among the skeptics earlier, nodded in agreement. "It's their world. They come from a place where danger is normal. They don't see threats the way we do because, to them, this is normal. They've been living this every day. The realization hit hard. The Deathworlders' unique perspective on survival wasn't something that could be taught in training or simulated in a test. It was ingrained in them, part of their very nature. Their evolution on a planet that constantly sought to destroy them had turned them into something more than survivors. They were problem solvers, thinkers, adaptable in ways that no one else was. Where other species saw danger, humans saw a challenge to be overcome. As the test came to a close, the verdict was clear. The Deathworlders didn't just endure, they thrived. They had turned what was supposed to be the ultimate test of survival into a showcase of their superiority in handling adversity. In doing so, they had forever changed the way the Galactic Alliance viewed them. No longer were they simply participants in the test. They were the new standard by which all survival would be judged. In the quiet moments after the test, as the humans gathered to share a few laughs and pack up their gear, the observers continued to watch in awe. They had learned something that day, something that would shift the way they approached survival, training, and danger itself. The Deathworlders had redefined what it meant to survive, and they had done so with ease.